Everyone ignored the orange cat that waited by the park bench. Until a man with a cane sat down and whispered, "You're still here." The park bench, crafted from weathered gray stone, sat nestled beneath the browning leaves of an ancient oak. It was a fixture of Elmwood Park, as much a part of the landscape as the towering trees and the winding pathways. Generations of laughter, whispered secrets, and quiet contemplations had soaked into its smooth, cool surface. Autumn was surrendering to the encroaching chill of winter. The vibrant reds and golds of the leaves had faded to muted browns, and a crispness hung in the air, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. The park itself was a microcosm of small-town America. Children shrieked with delight on the swings, their bright jackets flashes of color against the gray sky. Dog walkers strolled along the paths, their conversations punctuated by the rhythmic clicking of leashes. Squirrels darted nervously across the grass, gathering the last of the acorns before the snow arrived. Life flowed around the stone bench, a constant ebb and flow of activity. And on the bench, or sometimes curled at its base, was the orange cat. He wasn't a particularly striking cat. Not large or majestic, not sleek and elegant. He was just orange. A faded, dusty orange, like a well-worn penny. His fur was thick, hinting at a life lived outdoors, and his amber eyes held a watchful stillness, a quiet observation of the world around him. He was, to most passers-by, just another stray, another anonymous creature blending into the urban landscape. They ignored him. Children sometimes pointed, their parents shooing them away, murmuring about germs and unknown animals. Teenagers sprawled on the grass nearby, oblivious to his presence. Joggers pounded past, their headphones blocking out the subtle sounds of the park, including the soft thump of the cat jumping onto the bench. But the cat didn't seem to mind the indifference. He had his routine, his purpose, his unwavering presence on the stone bench. He'd arrive early each morning, just as the sun began to paint the sky with pale hues of pink and gold. He'd stretch, a long, luxurious extension of his body, then settle down on the bench, usually on the right-hand side, his paws tucked neatly beneath him. He'd watch the park come to life. He'd observe the early morning dog walkers, the dedicated joggers, the mothers pushing strollers. He'd track the flight of birds overhead, the scurrying of squirrels in the undergrowth. He was a silent witness to the small dramas and quiet joys of the park's inhabitants. He was self-sufficient. He'd disappear occasionally, presumably to hunt, returning with a subtle smugness in his eyes. He'd drink from the park's fountain, lapping delicately at the water with his pink tongue. He was a survivor, a creature adapted to his environment. But there was also a subtle air of waiting about him. Not an impatient waiting, not a restless pacing. It was a patient, enduring waiting, as if he were holding vigil for something, or someone, that had yet to arrive. He'd stay put, unmoving, no matter rain or shine. Occasionally, someone would mention the man who used to sit on that bench. A park worker, sweeping leaves nearby, might mutter, "That cat's been there ever since old Mr. Henderson stopped coming. Stubborn old thing." Or a young mother, pushing a stroller, might answer her child's curious question with, "Nobody sits there, sweetie. Just the kitty. Mr. Henderson used to sit there with his wife a long, long time ago. But she's gone now, I think." These snippets of conversation drifted around the cat, unnoticed, unacknowledged. He remained on the bench, his gaze fixed on some distant point, his body still, his presence a constant in the ever-changing landscape of the park. As the days grew shorter and the air grew colder, a subtle shift occurred in the cat's demeanor. He became more alert, his ears pricking more frequently, his gaze scanning the park entrance with a renewed intensity. It was as if he were listening for a particular sound, searching for a familiar scent, waiting for a sign that only he could recognize. The waiting had intensified, sharpened, become almost palpable. Something or someone was coming. He could feel it. The crunch of dried leaves underfoot was the first sign. A slow, deliberate sound, punctuated by the rhythmic tap-tap of a cane. The orange cat, curled on the stone bench, lifted his head, his ears swiveling forward, his amber eyes focusing on the park entrance. He remained motionless, a statue of faded orange fur against the gray stone, but his entire body was alert, every muscle tense with anticipation. Mr. Henderson paused at the entrance to Elmwood Park, his hand gripping the smooth, worn handle of his cane. He hadn't been here in 10 years. 10 years since Eleanor had passed, 10 years since their park, had become a place of unbearable memories. He stood there for a long moment, his breath misting in the cold air, his heart a heavy weight in his chest. He was an old man now, his shoulders stooped, his once strong frame thinned by age and grief. His hair, once of vibrant auburn, was now completely white, a thin halo around his weathered face. Deep lines etched his forehead and framed his mouth, the map of a life lived, of joys and sorrows deeply felt. His eyes, a pale blue, were clouded with a mixture of sadness and apprehension. The park looked both familiar and alien. The same towering oak trees, their branches now bare and skeletal against the gray sky. The same winding paths, now covered in a carpet of fallen leaves. The same children's playground, the swings swaying gently in the breeze. But everything felt different, muted, as if viewed through a veil of grief. He took a tentative step forward, then another. The cane provided a steadying support, but his legs trembled with the effort. Each step was a struggle, not just physically, but emotionally. He was walking back into a past he had tried to bury, a past filled with both joy and unbearable pain. His internal monologue was a torrent of conflicting emotions. I shouldn't be here, he thought. It's too painful. I can't do this. But another voice, a small, insistent voice, urged him forward. She would want you to. She loved this place. And he's still here. He's waiting. The he was unspoken, unnamed, but Mr. Henderson knew. He knew the orange cat would be there. He had to be. The cat watched him approach. He didn't move, didn't make a sound. He simply observed, his gaze unwavering, his body radiating a quiet intensity. From the cat's perspective, the man was a distant figure, a silhouette against the muted colors of the late autumn landscape. But as he drew closer, details began to emerge: the familiar shape of his shoulders, the slight stoop, the hesitant gait, and then the scent, a faint, familiar scent of pipe tobacco and old wool, a scent that triggered a deep, instinctive recognition within the cat's memory. Mr. Henderson walked slowly, deliberately, his gaze fixed on the stone bench. He could see the cat now, a splash of orange against the gray. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, a mixture of fear and anticipation. He was terrified of what he might feel, of the flood of memories that would inevitably wash over him. But he couldn't turn back. He had come too far. The distance between them closed, step by agonizing step. The cat remained perfectly still, his amber eyes locked on Mr. Henderson's face. He saw the man's trembling hand, the cane clutched tightly in his grip, the deep lines of sorrow etched around his eyes and mouth. He saw the hesitation, the pain, the flicker of recognition in his gaze. Finally, Mr. Henderson reached the bench. He stood there for a moment, his breath catching in his throat, his eyes welling up with tears. He looked at the cat, and the cat looked back at him. The years melted away, the silence of the park amplifying the unspoken connection between them. He slowly lowered himself onto the bench, the stone cold and hard beneath him. He sat stiffly, his back aching, his hands resting on the handle of his cane. He didn't speak, didn't move. He simply looked at the cat, his gaze filled with a mixture of sorrow, relief, and a profound sense of homecoming. The cat, in turn, continued to observe him, his amber eyes unblinking. He saw the familiar face, now etched with the passage of time, the familiar hands, now gnarled and trembling. He sensed the deep sadness, the lingering grief, but he also sensed something else: a flicker of warmth, a spark of recognition, a reawakening of a bond that had never truly been broken. Mr. Henderson reached out a trembling hand, his fingers hovering just above the cat's head. He didn't touch him yet, as if afraid to break the spell, afraid to shatter the fragile moment of reunion. The anticipation hung heavy in the air, a silent question, a silent plea. The years of separation, the pain of loss, the enduring power of love, it all converged in that single, suspended moment. The words, when they finally came, were a whisper, a breath of sound barely audible above the rustle of the wind in the bare branches. "You're still here, Mr. Henderson murmured, his voice thick with emotion. It wasn't a question, but a statement of profound recognition, a release of years of pent-up grief and longing. He hadn't known, not for certain, that the cat would still be here. He had hoped with a desperate, fragile hope, but he hadn't dared to believe. The cat's response was subtle, but unmistakable. He slowly rose from his curled position, stretched his body in a long, elegant arc, and then stepped forward cautiously towards Mr. Henderson. He paused, his nose twitching, inhaling the familiar scent of the man, a scent that had been etched in his memory for a decade. Then he rubbed his head against Mr. Henderson's outstretched hand, a soft, gentle pressure that spoke volumes. A low purr rumbled in the cat's chest, a deep, resonant vibration that traveled up Mr. Henderson's arm, settling in his heart. It was a sound he hadn't heard in 10 years, a sound that had once been a constant presence in his life, a sound that had filled his home with warmth and contentment. Mr. Henderson began to stroke the cat's fur, his touch initially hesitant, almost reverent, as if afraid of breaking the spell. The fur was coarser than he remembered, matted in places, bearing the marks of a life lived outdoors. But it was still him, still Rusty. "Rusty," he whispered, the name of a forgotten prayer, a key unlocking a floodgate of memories. The physical contact was crucial. It was the bridge across the chasm of time and loss. It was the confirmation, the tangible proof that this reunion was real, not just a figment of his grieving imagination. The warmth of the cat's body beneath his hand, the steady rhythm of his purr, the soft texture of his fur, these were anchors, grounding him in the present moment, reconnecting him to a past he had thought lost forever. As he stroked Rusty, flashbacks began to surface, vivid and poignant, interwoven with the present moment. He saw Eleanor, his beloved wife, her face radiant with laughter, sitting on this very bench, a much younger Rusty curled up on her lap. He saw himself, younger and stronger, tossing a ball for Rusty in the park, the cat chasing it with playful energy. He heard Eleanor's voice, calling Rusty's name, her tone filled with affection. Eleanor, her hair still streaked with auburn, is carefully wrapping a small, red ribbon around Rusty's neck. It's Christmas morning, and the tiny kitten, a ball of orange fluff, is their first shared pet. "He looks like a little present," she says, her eyes sparkling. Mr. Henderson smiles, his heart swelling with love for both of them. He felt the phantom weight of Eleanor's hand in his, the ghost of her presence beside him on the bench. The park, once a source of unbearable pain, was now becoming a sanctuary, a place where he could reconnect with her memory, with their shared life, through the enduring presence of their beloved cat. Years later, they're sitting on the same bench, their hair now streaked with gray. Rusty, a mature cat, is nestled between them, his purr a constant, comforting hum. They're watching the sunset, the sky ablaze with color. Eleanor leans her head on Mr. Henderson's shoulder. "We're so lucky, aren't we?" she whispers. He squeezes her hand, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. The tears flowed freely now, tears of grief, of relief, of gratitude. He wept for Eleanor, for the life they had shared, for the years they had lost. But he also wept for the present moment, for the unexpected gift of this reunion, for the enduring love that had survived the passage of time and the pain of loss. The last flashback is the most painful. Eleanor is in a hospital bed, frail and weak, her hand clutching his. Rusty is curled up at the foot of the bed, a silent, watchful presence. Eleanor smiles weakly. "Take care of him, won't you?" she whispers. And don't forget about the park. It's our place." He promises, his voice choked with sobs, knowing that he's losing her. Rusty, sensing his distress, butted his head against Mr. Henderson's hand, a gentle, insistent gesture. He licked his hand, his rough tongue a surprisingly comforting sensation. It was as if the cat were saying, "I'm here. I understand. You're not alone." They sat there together for a long time, the old man and the old cat, bathed in the pale sunlight of the late autumn afternoon. The sounds of the park, the laughter of children, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of traffic faded into the background. The only reality was the shared silence, the shared grief, the shared comfort of their presence. The years of separation had vanished, as if they had never been apart. They were together again on their bench in their park. And in that moment, that was all that mattered. The reunion on the stone bench became a ritual, a daily pilgrimage for Mr. Henderson. Every afternoon, regardless of the weather, he would make the slow, deliberate journey to Elmwood Park, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the pavement. And every afternoon, Rusty would be waiting for him, a faithful orange sentinel on their weathered stone throne. This new routine became the anchor of Mr. Henderson's days, a source of purpose and solace in a life that had felt empty and meaningless for so long. It was a way to reconnect with Eleanor, to honor her memory, and to find comfort in the enduring presence of their beloved cat. The passage of time was marked by the subtle shifts in the park's landscape. The last of the autumn leaves fell, leaving the trees bare and skeletal against the winter sky. Snow flurries dusted the ground, then gave way to a deeper, more persistent snow, blanketing the park in a layer of white silence. The days grew shorter, the nights longer, and the air held a biting chill. But even as the world outside grew colder and harsher, the space around the stone bench became a haven of warmth and companionship. Mr. Henderson brought a thick, wool blanket, draping it over his legs and sharing a corner with Rusty, who would curl up beside him, his purr a constant, comforting rumble. The flashbacks continued, triggered by the familiar sights, sounds, and smells of the park. Each memory was a bittersweet echo of a life lived, a love shared, a loss endured. He sees Eleanor scattering breadcrumbs for the birds, her face alight with childlike wonder as they flutter around her. Rusty, a young and playful cat, watches from a distance, his tail twitching with amusement. He hears the echo of Eleanor's laughter as they play a game of frisbee with Rusty, the cat leaping and bounding with surprising agility, his orange fur a blur against the green grass. He smells the faint scent of Eleanor's perfume, a delicate floral fragrance that always reminded him of springtime, and he remembers the day they first brought Rusty to the park, a tiny kitten nestled in a carrier, mewing nervously. He sees the two sitting next to each other on the bench, reading in silence. Rusty is in the middle, sleeping. These memories, once a source of unbearable pain, were now becoming a source of comfort. They were proof that their love had existed, that their life together had been real, that Eleanor's spirit still lived on, in the park, in the cat, in his own heart. Mr. Henderson started talking to Rusty more openly, sharing his thoughts, his memories, his grief. He'd tell him about his day, about the small things that had happened, about the things he missed about Eleanor. He'd talk about the past, about their life together, about the joy and the sorrow they had shared. "She loved this park, you know?" he'd say, stroking Rusty's fur. "She loved the flowers, the trees, the birds. She even loved the squirrels, though she'd pretend to scold them for digging up her bulbs." Rusty would listen patiently, his amber eyes fixed on Mr. Henderson's face, his purr a constant, reassuring presence. He didn't offer advice, he didn't judge, he didn't interrupt. He simply listened, a silent, furry confidant, a living embodiment of the love that had once filled the space. As the winter deepened, Mr. Henderson brought a small thermos of hot tea to the park, sharing a few drops with Rusty in a small, collapsible bowl he kept in his pocket. He also brought a small, brushed steel box, filled with Eleanor's ashes. He hadn't been able to bring himself to scatter them. Not yet. But he knew she would have wanted to be here in their park with him and Rusty. He did not open, but kept it with him. One particularly cold afternoon, as a fierce wind whipped through the bare branches of the trees, Mr. Henderson wrapped the blanket more tightly around himself and Rusty. He looked at the cat, his old, faded friend, and felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Rusty," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for being here." It was a small gesture, a simple expression of gratitude, but it signified a profound shift in Mr. Henderson's heart. He was accepting the present, acknowledging the comfort and companionship that Rusty offered, and finding a way to move forward, carrying the memory of Eleanor with him, not as a burden, but as a source of strength. He was learning to live with the echoes of the past, finding solace in the quiet beauty of the present, and embracing the enduring bond that connected him to the cat, to the park, and to the love that had shaped his life. The harsh grip of winter eventually loosened, yielding to the tentative touch of spring. The snow melted, revealing patches of muddy earth and the first, brave shoots of green. The bare branches of the trees began to bud, tiny explosions of life against the still gray sky. The air, once biting and cold, softened, carrying the scent of damp earth and the promise of renewal. The park, too, underwent a transformation. The sounds of children's laughter grew louder, the paths became more crowded, and the flower beds, once barren and empty, began to show signs of color. Life, in all its vibrant forms, was returning. And on the stone bench, beneath the burgeoning canopy of the ancient oak, Mr. Henderson and Rusty continued their daily ritual. The blanket was gone now, replaced by the gentle warmth of the spring sun. The thermos of tea was still there, but often accompanied by a small bag of birdseed, a tribute to Eleanor's love for the feathered creatures of the park. The bond between the man and the cat had deepened, solidified by shared silence, shared memories, and the shared experience of witnessing the changing seasons. They had found a new rhythm, a new equilibrium, a quiet companionship that transcended words. Mr. Henderson still talked to Rusty, sharing his thoughts and feelings, his memories of Eleanor. But the conversations were no longer solely focused on grief and loss. He started to notice the small details of the park, the things Eleanor had loved, the vibrant colors of the tulips, the cheerful chirping of the robins, the delicate fragrance of the lilac bushes. He started to interact in small ways with other people in the park. A nod and a smile to a passing jogger. A brief exchange of pleasantries with a young mother pushing a stroller. A shared moment of amusement with a dog walker as Rusty, with surprising agility for his age, chased a butterfly. These interactions were fleeting, insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but they were significant for Mr. Henderson. They were proof that he was no longer completely isolated, that he was capable of connecting with the world, even in small ways. The cat, his constant companion, had subtly, gently, nudged him back towards life. One afternoon, Mr. Henderson was sitting with Rusty. He decided to take out the steel box. "Eleanor," he murmured, "I think it's time." He opens it, takes a little of the ashes, scattering them on the bench. "Now you can always sit with Rusty." He takes a little more and lets it flow through the air. "Now you are a part of this place we loved, that you loved." The final scene takes place on a warm, sunny afternoon, several weeks later. The park is in full bloom, a riot of color and fragrance. The air is filled with the sounds of birdsong, children's laughter, and the gentle hum of bees. Mr. Henderson is sitting on the stone bench, his back straight, his gaze serene. Rusty is curled up beside him, his orange fur gleaming in the sunlight, his purr a soft, rhythmic vibration. They are not alone, not in spirit. They are surrounded by the echoes of the past, the vibrant presence of the present, and the quiet promise of the future. Mr. Henderson looks out at the park, his eyes taking in the beauty of the scene. He sees the children playing, the couples strolling hand in hand, the families picnicking on the grass. He sees life, the joy, the enduring rhythm of the natural world, and he feels a sense of peace, a deep, abiding contentment that he hasn't felt in years. He reaches down and strokes Rusty's fur, his touch gentle and loving. The cat leans into his hand, his purr growing louder. They sit there together, in comfortable silence, two old souls connected by a bond that transcends time and loss. The stone bench, weathered and worn, remains a constant, a silent witness to the passage of years, the ebb and flow of life. It is a place of memory, a place of healing, a place of enduring connection. It is a testament to the power of love, the resilience of the human spirit, and the profound comfort that can be found in the companionship of a faithful orange cat. The sun sets, casting long shadows across the park, painting the sky in hues of orange, pink, and gold. And in the stillness of the evening, the stone bench remains, a symbol of enduring love, quiet companionship, and the simple, profound beauty of a life shared, a moment cherished, a bond unbroken.
Ginger cat still crying after owner passed away. Then the vet reads the cat's collar and says, "Oh my God! What if the secret hidden in the cat's collar wasn't just about a hidden will, but about the real reason the owner died?" Just when you think you understand, a shocking twist connected to the cat's crying changes everything. Subscribe, like, and listen to Uncover the Unbelievable Truth. Dr. Alan Evans held the small, surprisingly heavy cat collar tag under the bright halogen glare of the examination lamp. It wasn't the usual flimsy aluminum disc. This was thick, burnished bronze, intricately engraved on the front with the name Marmalade in an elegant script, below which was the late Arthur Abernathy's disconnected phone number. It felt old, significant. He'd been Arthur's vet for nearly 20 years, and Marmalade's vet for the 10 years since Arthur had adopted the stray ginger tomcat. He knew Arthur had doted on the animal, but this tag seemed excessive, almost ceremonial. He turned it over, expecting a blank surface or perhaps a rabies vaccination number. Instead, his fingers traced a barely perceptible line, a near invisible seam bisecting the tag's reverse side. His curiosity piqued. He slid a fine-tipped probe from his instrument tray along the seam. With a faint click, a minuscule hinged section, no bigger than a thumbnail, sprang open. It wasn't a locket holding a picture. Inside the shallow recess lay a tiny dark square that looked like aged microfilm, secured by miniature brass tabs. Sarah Abernathy, Arthur's daughter, leaned forward from the plastic chair where she'd been anxiously watching him examine her late father's inconsolable cat. "What is that?" "I'm not sure," Alan murmured, reaching for the magnifying eyepiece he used for delicate procedures. He carefully positioned the eyepiece, focusing on the dark square. It was microfilm, incredibly dense with text reduced to microscopic size. He adjusted the focus. His breath held. Lines of precise, archaic-looking script swam into view. It wasn't just random text. It looked like instructions, coordinates, a formula. His eyes scanned rapidly, catching fragments. Lunar alignment, third folio, beneath the silent sentinel, veritas vos liberabit. Latin? What on earth had Arthur been involved in? He continued reading, the implications starting to dawn, each cryptic phrase hinting at something far more complex than the quiet life of a retired history professor. His heart began to beat faster. Then he reached the final lines, a direct address, seemingly anticipating this very moment. His blood ran cold. The professional detachment he maintained, honed over decades of practice, dissolved in an instant. A sharp, involuntary gasp escaped his lips. His hand trembled slightly as he lowered the magnifier, his face paling. He looked from the microfilm to the grieving cat, now watching him with unnervingly intelligent green eyes, then to Sarah, whose bewildered expression mirrored his own shock. The words caught in his throat, emerging as a choked whisper, utterly unprofessional, but completely involuntary. "Oh my God!" Sarah shot up from her chair. "Dr. Evans? Alan? What is it? What does it say?" But Alan couldn't answer immediately. He could only stare at the collar tag, at the microscopic message containing a secret so profound, so potentially dangerous. It threatened to unravel everything Sarah thought she knew about her quiet, bookish father, and placed this grieving ginger cat directly at the center of an unbelievable legacy. Just 3 weeks earlier, Sarah Abernathy had landed at the small regional airport serving the quaint New England town her father had called home for 40 years. The call informing her of his sudden death, a heart attack while reading in his favorite armchair, had been abrupt, clinical, leaving her reeling not just from shock, but from a complex mix of grief, guilt, and unresolved resentment. Arthur Abernathy, Ph.D., retired professor of antiquarian studies, had always been an enigma. Brilliant, respected in his obscure field, but emotionally distant, especially after Sarah's mother passed away 15 years ago. He'd retreated into his world of rare books, dusty artifacts, and, for the last decade, his constant companion, Marmalade, the ginger cat he'd rescued from a shelter. Sarah, a pragmatic software engineer living a busy life in California, had maintained dutiful, if infrequent, contact. Visits were polite but strained, filled with long silences amidst the towering bookshelves and glass display cases housing strange, ancient objects she didn't understand. She'd resented his reclusiveness, his apparent preference for the past over the present, for his cat over his daughter. Now, faced with sorting out his affairs, she felt adrift in his dusty, silent house, a stranger in her childhood home. The initial legalities seemed straightforward. Arthur's lawyer presented a simple, recently updated will leaving the house and its contents to Sarah, with a modest bequest to the local historical society. Her cousin Leonard, a smooth-talking real estate developer Sarah had never particularly trusted, called immediately, offering condolences quickly followed by unsolicited advice about selling the house as is to avoid the hassle of clearing it out. "All that old junk isn't worth much, Sarah," he'd said smoothly. "Better to liquidate quickly." But one living, breathing complication refused to be ignored. Marmalade. The cat was utterly devastated. He refused his favorite salmon treats, ignored the cozy bed Sarah bought him, and spent hours huddled by Arthur's empty armchair, emitting low, mournful yowls that sounded disturbingly like human weeping. His vibrant ginger coat grew dull, His intelligent green eyes seemed clouded with sorrow. Sarah, initially seeing the cat as just another item on her overwhelming to-do list, found herself increasingly disturbed by the depth of his grief. It felt too human. It mirrored her own unexpressed sorrow, a connection she hadn't expected. She tried everything: special food, pheromone diffusers, soft music. Nothing worked. Marmalade was fading, consumed by a grief that seemed disproportionate even for a beloved pet. Was he physically ill? Was the stress of Arthur's absence making him sick? She couldn't stand to watch him suffer. Sorting through Arthur's meticulously filed papers, she found the records for Dr. Alan Evans, noting the frequency of checkups for Marmalade. Her father, it seemed, had spared no expense on the cat's care. Making the appointment felt like the first proactive step she'd taken since arriving. A small act of carrying on her father's devotion, if nothing else. Maybe the vet could offer a sedative, some advice, anything to ease the cat's palpable pain. She coaxed the listless Marmalade into his carrier, his usual feisty resistance replaced by weary compliance. As she drove the familiar route to the clinic on Elm Street, she hoped for simple answers. A diagnosis, a prescription. She never imagined that the visit, prompted by the cat's heartbreaking cries, would become the inciting incident for unraveling the secret life of Arthur Abernathy, triggered by the vet uttering those 3 shocked words as he examined Marmalade's peculiar bronze collar tag. Oh my God. Sarah, standing stunned in the sterile examination room, knew instantly that her task had just become infinitely more complicated than settling a simple will. Her father's legacy, and perhaps her own future, had just taken a sharp, incomprehensible turn. Alan Evans, his composure somewhat regained, carefully removed the microfilm from the tag using fine tweezers and placed it under a digital microscope connected to a monitor. The cryptic text filled the screen, clearer now but no less bewildering. Arthur was meticulous, Alan breathed, scrolling through the lines. It seems to be a set of instructions, heavily coded, references to historical texts, astronomical events, and this. He pointed to a specific sequence. These look like library Dewey Decimal numbers but scrambled. And these, maybe geographical coordinates? Sarah stared at the screen, feeling a disconnect from reality. Coordinates? Codes? My father was a history professor, Alan, not a spy. Arthur collected more than just history books, Sarah, Alan said quietly. He occasionally consulted for museums, private collectors, sometimes on pieces with disputed provenance. He was discreet. This message, he gestured to the screen, it seems to be a fail-safe. Instructions, perhaps, to locate something important he didn't want found through conventional means. And he used Marmalade's collar as the delivery system. He zoomed in on the final lines he'd read earlier. To my successor, guided here by feline loyalty. The true ledger is hidden. Seek the convergence point where Cassini's eye meets Galileo's truth beneath the silent sentinel's gaze. Veritas vos liberabit. Followed by a complex alphanumeric string. The truth will set you free? Sarah translated the Latin. What truth? What ledger? Successor? It made no sense. Yet, the sheer strangeness of it, her father's deliberate secrecy, ignited a spark of determination within her. The simple will her lawyer had must be a decoy. This message, delivered via a grieving cat, held the key to his real intentions, and that alphanumeric string, it looked almost like a password. Returning to her father's house felt different now. It wasn't just a repository of dusty memories. It was a puzzle box. Armed with photos Alan had taken of the microfilm text, Sarah began her search. The house was overwhelming. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves dominated every room, interspersed with glass cabinets filled with pottery shards, antique maps, astrolabes, and scientific instruments she couldn't identify. Where to even begin? Cassini's eye meets Galileo's truth. Was it astronomy? Cartography? She started with the library, cross-referencing the scrambled Dewey Decimal numbers. It was slow, tedious work. Many numbers led to books Arthur didn't seem to own, or to multiple possibilities. Marmalade shadowed her, no longer confined to the armchair, but moving restlessly through the house, occasionally stopping to sniff intently at a particular shelf or object, before moving on, his mournful cries softer now, replaced by an air of quiet observation. Her cousin Leonard called again, his tone shifting from smooth condolence to impatient probing. "Sarah, the lawyer mentioned you haven't signed off on probate yet. Any holdups? I've got a buyer interested in the property, sight unseen, cash offer, quick and clean." "I'm still sorting through Dad's personal effects, Leonard," Sarah replied coolly, unwilling to reveal her discovery. "It's taking longer than expected." His pushiness solidified her suspicion that he knew or suspected there was more to Arthur's estate than the simple will suggested. Days bled into a week. Sarah deciphered fragments, connecting some scrambled numbers to specific editions of astronomical texts from the 17th century, Galileo's era. Cassini's eye likely referred to Cassini's maps of the moon or his observations of Saturn, but the convergence point and the silent sentinel, it remained opaque. Frustration mounted. She found Arthur's personal journals, hoping for clues, but they were filled with academic notes, observations on Marmalade's habits, and cryptic philosophical musings. Nothing concrete. One afternoon, exhausted, she sat at Arthur's massive oak desk, staring blankly at a large antique terrestrial globe mounted on a heavy brass stand. The silent sentinel, perhaps? Marmalade hopped onto the desk, walked directly to the globe, and pointedly rubbed his cheek against the stand's base, right where the brass meridian ring was attached. He looked at Sarah, blinked slowly, and meowed a soft, expectant sound. Hesitantly, Sarah examined the base. Running her fingers along the brass, she felt a tiny, almost invisible button concealed within the engraved ornamentation. She pressed it. With a soft click, a section of the globe itself, corresponding to the North Atlantic Ocean, swung open on hidden hinges, revealing a small hollow compartment. Inside lay not a ledger, but a single heavy antique brass key and a small leather-bound notebook. Her heart leaped, This was it, the next step. As she reached for the notebook, her phone rang. It was Leonard again, his voice tight with poorly concealed anger. "Sarah, I heard you were asking Ms. Albright down at the library about Dad's old astronomy books. What exactly are you looking for? If there's something valuable, as the primary beneficiary named in the official will the lawyer has, I have a right to know." The lines were being drawn. Leonard was no longer just snooping. He was actively investigating her actions. The complication wasn't just deciphering her father's puzzle. It was doing so before Leonard found a way to interfere legally or otherwise. The stakes had just risen dramatically. Holding the key in the notebook, with Marmalade purring softly beside the opened globe, Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline. She wasn't just settling an estate. She was racing against her cousin to uncover and protect her father's hidden legacy. The small notebook Sarah retrieved from the hidden globe compartment wasn't a journal in the conventional sense. Its pages were filled with dense coded entries interspersed with complex diagrams, star charts, and sketches of artifacts. It was clearly Arthur Abernathy's true ledger. But deciphering it presented a new, formidable challenge. The key, heavy and ornate, bore no identifying marks. What did it unlock? Sarah spent the next few days immersed in the notebook, cross-referencing symbols with obscure texts from her father's library, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of urgency. Leonard's calls became more frequent, his tone laced with thinly veiled threats about contesting the will or demanding a formal inventory if she didn't cooperate. She knew she was running out of time. Marmalade remained her quiet shadow, often settling near her as she worked, his presence a strange source of comfort. Occasionally, he would bat playfully at the antique key where she'd placed it on the desk, as if recognizing its significance. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. While studying a complex star chart in the notebook, Sarah noticed a recurring symbol overlaid on specific constellations, a symbol that matched an intricate carving on the handle of the brass key. Below the chart, a notation referenced a specific page number in a first edition of Sir Thomas Browne's Urn Burial, a book she knew her father treasured. Locating the volume, she turned to the indicated page. Tucked neatly within was a fragile onion skin paper containing a cipher key. Heart pounding, Sarah began applying the cipher to the notebook. The coded entries slowly resolved into legible English, revealing a narrative that stunned her. Arthur Abernathy hadn't just been a collector, he'd been a rescuer, as he put it. Over decades, using his academic connections and expertise, he had discreetly acquired artifacts he believed were looted, improperly acquired or at risk of being destroyed. A kind of secret curator protecting history from greed. The ledger detailed these items, their acquisition stories, some legally gray, and his long-term plans for their eventual repatriation or donation. He mentioned his fear that his nephew Leonard, whose avarice he'd long recognized, would simply sell off the collection piece by piece if he inherited it. The simple will was indeed a decoy, designed to satisfy Leonard initially, while this hidden message guided the right person someone trustworthy, someone led by Marmalade to the truth. The notebook also explained the key. It unlocked a custom-built, climate-controlled storage unit Arthur had rented under an assumed name in a secure facility in a neighboring state. Inside, the notebook promised were the artifacts themselves, along with his final, legally binding will and detailed instructions for Sarah, whom he named as his executor and trustee, conditional on her finding this ledger. He apologized for his secrecy, explaining it was the only way he felt he could protect both his legacy and her from potential complications or danger associated with some of the items. This revelation shifted everything. Her quiet, eccentric father had led a secret life driven by a fierce, protective passion she'd never glimpsed. Her resentment faded, replaced by awe, understanding, and a fierce determination to honor his trust. This wasn't just about money or objects. It was about fulfilling her father's life's work. She was no longer just the reluctant daughter settling affairs. She was the chosen successor, the guardian of his secrets. Just as she finished deciphering the crucial passages about the storage unit, she heard a car pull into the driveway. Peeking through the curtains, she saw Leonard getting out, a grim-faced man in a suit beside him, likely his lawyer. They were done making phone calls. Sarah took a deep breath. No more avoidance. She met them at the door before they could knock, the heavy brass key clutched tightly in her pocket, Marmalade winding himself around her ankles like a furry orange guard. "Leonard, unexpected," she said, her voice steady. "Sarah," Leonard replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. "This is my attorney, Mr. Davies. We've come to discuss the probate process. Since you seem reluctant to move forward with the existing will, we need to ensure my interests as the named beneficiary are protected. Perhaps a court-ordered appraisal of the contents is necessary." It was a direct challenge, an attempt to seize control. Looking at Leonard's greedy expression, Sarah felt a surge of certainty. Her father had been right to fear him. She thought of the hidden collection, the complex legacy Arthur had entrusted to her. There was no turning back now. "That won't be necessary, Leonard," Sarah stated calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I believe I've found my father's final testamentary instructions, and I will be executing them precisely." She gently closed the door, leaving Leonard and his lawyer momentarily speechless on the porch. The confrontation had happened. She had declared her position. Now, she had to get to that storage unit before Leonard found another way to interfere. The race was truly on. The next 48 hours were a blur of logistics and paranoia. The storage facility, identified through coordinates and details in Arthur's notebook, was a 3-hour drive away, across state lines. Sarah knew she needed to act fast, but also carefully. Leonard wouldn't give up easily. She pictured him instructing his lawyer to file emergency injunctions, hire private investigators, anything to stop her or seize control of Arthur's assets before she could access whatever lay in that unit. She decided she couldn't go alone. First, she called Dr. Evans, explaining the situation, The hidden legacy, the key, the storage unit, Leonard's confrontation. She asked if he would accompany her. "Arthur trusted you, Alan, with Marmalade and clearly with more than that. I could use an ally, a witness." Alan, deeply intrigued and feeling a sense of loyalty to his late client, agreed immediately. "Arthur was a good man, Sarah. Complex, evidently. I'll help any way I can." Next, she needed to arrange care for Marmalade. Leaving him alone, even for a day, felt risky with Leonard potentially lurking. She called Ms. Albright, the town librarian who had helped her research Arthur's books and who clearly held deep affection for the late professor. After swearing her to secrecy, Sarah explained the situation briefly. Ms. Albright, a formidable woman beneath her quiet exterior, readily agreed to stay at the house and look after Marmalade. "Arthur deserves to have his true wishes honored," she declared, "and Marmalade will be perfectly safe with me." While making these arrangements, Sarah felt constantly watched. Cars seemed to slow down as they passed the house. She received a hang-up call on her father's landline. Was it Leonard trying to intimidate her, or just her nerves? She double-checked the locks, kept the curtains drawn, and felt a prickle of genuine fear. Her father's notebook hinted at the controversial provenance of some items. Had he made enemies beyond greedy relatives? The night before their planned trip to the storage facility, Sarah experienced her darkest moment of doubt. Sitting alone in Arthur's study, the decoded notebook open before her, the weight of responsibility felt crushing. What if the storage unit was empty? What if Arthur's final instructions were legally invalid? What if Leonard managed to block her access? She was a software engineer, not an international art detective or estate lawyer. She felt utterly out of her depth, mourning her father not just for his death, but for the secret life she never knew and the burden he had placed upon her. Marmalade, sensing her distress, jumped onto her lap, purring loudly and butting his head against her chin, a grounding, furry presence in the overwhelming silence. His simple affection reminded her why she was doing this, for Arthur and for the loyal creature he had trusted to guide her. The next morning, she and Alan set off before dawn. The drive was tense, filled with anxious silence and furtive glances in the rearview mirror. They arrived at the high-security storage facility, a nondescript but imposing building surrounded by fences and cameras. At the front desk, Sarah presented the key and the rental agreement details retrieved from Arthur's hidden safe, unlocked by a combination found in the coded notebook. She used the alias her father had established, her heart pounding as the clerk checked the information. Just as the clerk verified the account and prepared to escort them, the facility's phone rang. The clerk answered, listened intently, then looked at Sarah with a troubled expression. "Ma'am, there's an attorney on the line, Mr. Davies. He represents Mr. Leonard Abernathy. He's stating that access to this unit should be frozen pending a court order regarding the estate of Arthur Abernathy, claiming you may be attempting to remove assets improperly." Sarah's blood ran cold. Leonard had found her. He was trying to block her at the last second, The final confrontation wasn't going to be later. It was happening right now, miles from home, with the secrets locked away just yards from where she stood. Alan put a steadying hand on her arm. The final push was here. "Let me speak to him," Sarah said, her voice remarkably calm, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The clerk, looking flustered, handed her the receiver. "Mr. Davies," Sarah began, keeping her tone level and firm. "This is Sarah Abernathy. I am acting under instructions left by my father, instructions that supersede the preliminary will you are referencing. This unit contains personal effects and legal documents pertaining to his final wishes." "Ms. Abernathy," Davies's voice was smooth but sharp. "My client, Mr. Leonard Abernathy, is the beneficiary named in the only legally recognized will filed with probate court. Your access to this unit is unauthorized. We are filing an emergency injunction as we speak. I advise you and the facility manager to cease immediately." Sarah took a gamble, relying on a detail Arthur had included in the coded notebook, a fail-safe for this exact scenario. "Mr. Davies, perhaps you should check the codicil dated 6 months prior to my father's death, filed securely with his primary legal counsel, Miller and Associates, not the local lawyer who drafted the preliminary will. That codicil specifically references a separate secure repository for his final testamentary documents and names me, Sarah Elizabeth Abernathy, as having sole preliminary access upon presentation of specific identification, namely the key I currently possess and knowledge of the account alias. It also explicitly anticipates and invalidates any attempt by Leonard Abernathy to interfere prior to the official reading of the final documents contained herein. Your injunction, I believe, will be found moot." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Sarah didn't know for sure if such a codicil existed with Miller and Associates, Arthur's long-term trusted firm. But her father's meticulous planning suggested it was highly probable. Davies sputtered, "This is highly irregular." "Perhaps," Sarah interrupted, pressing her advantage, "but it reflects my father's wishes. Please inform your client." "Manager," she turned to the clerk, handing back the phone, "I have the key, the account information, and my identification. Please proceed." The clerk, witnessing her confidence and hearing the lawyer's hesitation, made a decision. He nodded curtly and led Sarah and Alan through echoing corridors to a heavy steel door. Sarah inserted the heavy brass key. It turned smoothly. She swung the door open. Inside, the air was cool and dry. Metal shelves lined the walls, holding carefully wrapped objects, crates, and document boxes. And there, on a small table directly in front of them, was a large sealed manila envelope, clearly marked "Last Will and Testament of Arthur P. Abernathy, to be opened only by Sarah E. Abernathy." Victory. Leonard was blocked, at least for now. The central conflict, the race to uncover Arthur's true wishes before Leonard could stop her, was won. Sarah picked up the envelope, its weight signifying the end of one journey and the beginning of another. The contents of the safe deposit box were exactly as Arthur's notebook had described. The final notarized will was complex but clear. It established a significant trust fund managed by Sarah for the lifelong care of Marmalade, ensuring he could live out his days comfortably in the familiar surroundings of the Abernathy house. It detailed the rescued collection, providing provenance research where available, and expressing Arthur's fervent wish for Sarah to oversee the ethical repatriation or donation of the items to appropriate institutions, working with experts and potentially establishing a small foundation in his name. The house and a modest stipend were left to Sarah to enable her to manage these tasks. Leonard was left a nominal sum, sufficient to cover his disappointment. As Arthur had dryly written, the legal challenges Leonard attempted crumbled in the face of the meticulously prepared final will and Arthur's foresight in filing the protective codicil. Thwarted and exposed, Leonard retreated. Sarah, working with reputable estate lawyers and art historians, began the long, fascinating process of cataloging her father's secret collection and fulfilling his wishes. It was a daunting task, but deeply rewarding. Through his journals, the collection, and his final intricate plan, she finally came to understand and deeply respect the passionate, complex man her father had been. Her grief found a new shape, transformed into purpose. She decided not to return to her old life in California. The quiet house filled with history, once a symbol of distance, now felt like home, a place of connection. Ms. Albright became a regular visitor and invaluable research assistant. Dr. Evans often stopped by, ostensibly to check on Marmalade, but also to hear updates on the collection's progress. And Marmalade, with his world secure again, his routine restored, and Sarah's constant loving presence, his mournful cries ceased. He remained her steadfast companion, often supervising her work from a sunbeam on the desk or leading her on inspection tours of the house, occasionally batting at the now empty bronze collar tag Sarah kept as a memento. He was no longer just a cat. He was the furry catalyst, the loyal guardian who had held the key, literally and figuratively, to his master's final secrets. Sarah often looked at him, curled asleep in Arthur's old armchair, and smiled. Her father had known exactly what he was doing when he entrusted his legacy to the quiet loyalty of his ginger cat. Their new normal was quiet, filled with history and purpose, and warmed by the steady, comforting presence of Marmalade,